The Alpha King of the Highmoor was dying, and everyone in the great hall of Cairnholt knew it. He had been cut at the border 26 days before, a shallow cut, the kind of cut a man laughs about over supper. It had not closed. It had not bled the way a wound is supposed to bleed. It wept a thin, bright water that shone faintly in the dark, and under the skin around it something moved, slow and patient, the way frost creeps across a window in the night. 7 healers came. 7 healers failed. They burned it and packed it and cut into it, and every time they finished, the brightness under his skin had climbed a little farther up his ribs, toward the place where it would finally stop him. On the morning the last of them gave up, the king sent them all away. "No one else touches me," said Roan, king of the Highmoor, and his voice was so quiet that the men at the far end of the hall had to lean in to hear him. "Let me go out with my own name still on me." That should have been the end of it. The hall stood silent. The fire cracked in the great hearth. And then a woman walked up the middle of that hall, past 100 people who stepped back from her without meaning to, because half her face was burned, and both her hands were burned, and everyone in the north thought they knew what it meant when a girl came out of a fire alone. She stopped at the foot of the dais. She did not curtsy. She looked at the light moving under the king's skin the way a farrier looks at a lame horse, with recognition, and with something very close to anger. "I know what that is," said Thea. "I have carried it in my own arms for 12 years. 2 guards reached for her. The king lifted 2 fingers off the arm of his chair, and they stopped where they stood. "Let her," Roan said. She asked for no gold. She asked for 4 things: cold water, salt, darkness, and no fire, not ever again in that room. Neither of them knew, standing there in all that smoke and fear, that the thing killing him had been made in her father's forge on the night that took everything she had. Chapter 1. 12 years before any of this, Thornmere had been a village with a good forge and a bad road. Now it had a bad road. Thea was 26 years old, and she lived at the end of that road, in a stone cottage with a slate roof and a garden she was proud of. She grew feverfew and comfrey and 3 kinds of mint. She set bones. She sat with women through long births and with old men through long nights. The village of Thornmere would call for her at 3 in the morning without hesitating, and then, in daylight, in the market, those same people would look somewhere just past her shoulder while they talked to her. She understood it. She had stopped being angry about it years ago. Mostly. Burns frighten people. Burns that never quite healed right frighten them more. The left side of her jaw and her throat and her shoulder were marked with pale ridge scars, and both her forearms were marked from wrist to elbow, and in a dim room, if you looked at her too long, you could see a faint brightness in the seams of that old damage, like moonlight caught in water. Ash-touched, the old women of Thornmere called her, when they thought she could not hear. She could always hear. The riders came into the market on a gray afternoon in the 2nd week of autumn, 6 of them on tired horses, and the whole square went quiet. Highmoor men. Cairnholt men. The one who dismounted first had a gray beard and a soldier's walk, and a voice built to be heard across a field. "I want a healer," he said. "Any healer. I will pay in gold, and I will pay in advance, and I will bring you home again, whatever happens." Nobody moved. That was the thing that told Thea how bad it was. In a poor village, gold in advance should have started a small stampede. Old Marta from the alehouse spoke up at last. "Sir, we heard about the king. We heard 7 have gone up there already." "9, if you count the 2 who turned back at the gate," the soldier said. "And they all failed." They did. "Then what would ours do differently?" Marta said, not unkindly. The soldier had no answer. He stood there in the middle of the square with his jaw working, a big man made helpless, and Thea watched him and thought that he loved the man he was trying to save. She could see it in the way he could not quite say the word dying. She made herself step forward. "What does the wound look like?" The soldier turned. He looked at her face, and she watched him do the thing they all did, the small flick of the eyes away and back, before he answered her honestly. "It weeps clear," he said. "Bright, almost. It shines in the dark. And there is something in him that moves." Thea's hands went cold. "Moves how?" she said. "Up," the soldier said. "Always up, toward his heart. The healers say it is a poison. They have burned it twice, and it only came faster." "Of course it came faster," Thea said. "Fire calls it." The square went very quiet. The soldier stared at her. "What did you say?" Thea pushed her left sleeve up to the elbow, there in the market, in front of everyone who had ever looked past her shoulder. The old scars caught the flat autumn light and gave back a thin gleam that had nothing to do with the sun. "My name is Thea," she said. "I know what is in your king. I have been carrying it since I was 14 years old. And whoever put it in him did not do it with a poison. They did it with a piece of metal, and they meant it. And if you keep letting people hold a flame to that man, you will kill him 3 days sooner than he needs to die." The soldier's name was Byrne. He was the king's war captain, and he had been a soldier for 31 years. And he told her afterward that he had never in his life made a decision that fast. "Get your things," he said. Chapter 2. They rode north for 2 days, up out of the low country and into the Ashfells, where the hills go bare and the wind has opinions. Byrne was decent to her on that road, in a rough way. He gave her the inside of the fire at night and asked her no questions about her face. On the second morning, riding up through a pass with the whole gray world falling away below them, he finally asked the question he had been holding. How did a hedge healer from Thornmere come to know a thing that 9 trained men do not know? "Because it happened to me," Thea said. 9 trained men have read about poisons. I have had it under my skin for 12 years. "And it did not kill you?" "It did not kill me because it went in slow, and because I was in cold water for most of that first night," Thea said. "I did not do anything clever. I was 14, and I was in a burning building, and I went into the mill race because the mill race was there. That is the whole of my genius, Byrne." Byrne grunted. Then, after a while, he said, "The last healer told him to make peace with the mother and get his affairs in order." "What did he say to that?" "He thanked the man," Byrne said, "paid him, sent him home with an escort." He looked over. "He has not raised his voice once this whole time, not once. I have known Roan since he was a boy, and I would give a great deal to hear him shout." Cairnholt sat on a shoulder of black rock with the fells rising behind it, and the first thing Thea noticed as they rode under the gate was that nobody was working. There were people everywhere, in the yard, on the steps, along the walls, and they were all standing about doing nothing at all, which, in a place that size, meant one thing. They were waiting. A hold that size holds 400 souls, and every one of those 400 was listening for a bell they did not want to hear. The second thing she noticed was the smell of the place. Wood smoke and hot iron and vinegar and the sour, unmistakable smell of a sick room that has been kept too warm for too long. "You have fires lit," she said. "It is autumn," Byrne said. "Put them out on his floor, all of them, now, please, before I take my cloak off." The steward met them in the passage. He was a thin, careful man named Halloway, and he looked at Thea and did not manage to hide his face in time. "Captain," he said, "the physician has asked that no more country healers be brought in. He says the disturbance is doing harm." The physician does not command me, Byrne said. The physician, Thea said. Which physician? The answer came around the corner before Holloway could give it. He was a tall man in his 50s, silver-haired, beautifully dressed in dark wool, with no ornament anywhere on him except a small black cord at his throat. He wore thin gray gloves. Thea would think about those gloves a great deal later, and be angry at herself for not thinking about them sooner. Master Corvin of the Iron Coast, he said, and he bowed to her, actually bowed, to a scarred woman in a wet riding cloak, so smoothly that it took her a moment to feel how thoroughly she had just been put in her place. Forgive me. You have ridden 2 days for nothing, and that is a cruel thing to do to anyone. I have treated 4 alphas for the wasting sickness in the last 3 years, and I know its face. There is no cure. There is only kindness at this point, and quiet. May I see him? Thea said. You may pay your respects, said Master Corvin, as anyone may. They took her up. The chamber was long and dim and far too hot, and there were 3 braziers burning in it, and Thea walked to each one in turn and smothered them with the lid of a water jug and a folded blanket, while a young page stared at her with his mouth open. Then she looked at the bed. Roan of the Highmoor had been a big man. She could see the frame of him under the blanket, the width of the shoulders, the long, heavy arms, and she could see how much of him was gone. His face had gone to angles. There was gray at his temples that Byrne told her later had not been there in the spring. He was 32 years old. He was also awake and watching her, and his eyes were a clear amber that the fever had not touched at all. You put out my fires, he said. Yes. Holloway will be upset. He has a system. He may be as upset as he likes, Thea said. Someone drew a breath behind her. Nobody in that hold had spoken to the king like that in a month, because nobody speaks plainly to a dying man. And Thea watched the corner of Roan's mouth move about half an inch and understood that he had been starved of it. Show me the wound, she said. They folded the blanket back. The cut was on his left side, below the ribs, no longer than her thumb, and it had not closed in 26 days. Around it the skin was pale and drawn, and threaded through that pale skin, fine as hair, were lines of something that was not blood and was not silver, but was near cousin to both. They ran upward. They ran in the same direction, all of them, like grass under a current. Thea had seen those lines before, on her own arms, in a mirror, at 14, screaming. She heard herself say, very quietly, "How long has he got?" The old woman standing in the corner answered. Anwin, the hold's own healer, 63 years old and gray in the face with exhaustion, the only person there who had not once looked away from Thea's scars. 9 days, Anwin said. Maybe fewer. When it reaches the heart, it stops. 9 days. That was what was left of him. 9 days, and then the Highmoor would have no king, and the passes of the Ashfells would belong to whoever wanted them most. Thea rolled her sleeves to the elbow. Behind her, Master Corvin said, in a voice like warm milk, "My dear, I would not touch that with bare hands." Chapter 3. Thea did not answer him. She crossed to the bed, and she sat down on the edge of it without asking permission, and she put her bare hand flat on the king's side. The room made a sound. Not a word, just a collective intake of breath, the noise a crowd makes when someone steps off a wall. Under her palm, the wound was cold. Not cool, cold, the way a well chain is cold in February, and Thea felt the thing inside him notice her. That was the only way she ever found to describe it. It noticed her. The fine, bright threads under his skin stopped drifting upward and turned, all of them at once, the way a field of barley turns when the wind changes, and they came toward her hand. Thea let out a breath she had been holding since the market square in Thornmere. "There you are," she said. "Is it supposed to do that?" said the king. "Yes," said Thea. "It is exactly supposed to do that." She realized she was almost smiling and made herself stop, because there was nothing here to smile about. "Your Grace, I need you to answer me plainly and not kindly. Does that hurt?" "No," Roan said. "It has never hurt. It is cold and it is heavy, and it is getting heavier." "Where is the weight now?" He touched 2 fingers to a place high on his ribs, just under the arm. Thea looked at where his hand was, and then at the wound, and did the arithmetic, and did not let it show on her face. "Say it," Roan said. "Say what?" "Whatever you have just decided not to tell me," he said. "Everyone in this room has been managing me for a month. Anwen manages me gently, Byrne manages me badly, and Master Corvin manages me the way a man manages a horse he has already sold. I would take it as a great kindness if you did not." Thea looked at him properly then, for the first time. She had come up here expecting to be tolerated. She had expected the flinch, and then the polite face people put on over the flinch, and she had made her peace with both of those on the road. What she had not expected was that a dying man would look directly at the burned half of her face, and keep looking, and be entirely occupied with something else. "It is moving faster than it should," she said. "In me, it took a year to travel the length of my forearm. In you, it has crossed half your chest in 26 days. Something is helping it." "Fire," Roan said. "Fire drives it," Thea said. "But fire alone would not do this." Behind her, smooth as poured cream, Master Corvin said, "Or the difference is simply that you were 14, and he is 32, and a child's blood is a slower road. There is no need to invent a villain for a sad thing." Thea did not turn around. She kept her hand where it was. "How many of the 4 alphas you treated are alive, Master Corvin?" she asked. There was a pause about the width of a heartbeat. "1," said Corvin. "Lord Dunlock. He is much reduced, poor man, but he lives. And the other 3. "I buried them," said Corvin, "with my own hands, and I do not thank you for asking me to count them in front of a patient." It was a good answer. It was such a good answer that half the room turned to look at Thea as though she had kicked a dog. She felt the temperature of the chamber change, and she thought, calmly, "This man is better at rooms than I will ever be." So she stopped playing for the room. "Your Grace," she said, "I want to tell you what I think is true, and then I want you to send me home if you disagree, and I will go without any argument." "Go on." "That is not a sickness. Nobody caught it. It is a metal. It comes out of the deep seams under these fells, and the old women in my village called it witch silver, and the smiths would not work it because it does not behave. Heat makes it travel. It goes toward warmth, and it goes toward more of itself. And once it is inside a body, it climbs, and it does not stop climbing until it reaches the place where the blood is loudest." She paused. "Somebody put it into a blade. Somebody quenched a blade in it and sharpened it and made sure it found you. That was not a duel you lost, Your Grace. That was a delivery." The room did not breathe. "You cannot possibly know that," said Halloway the steward faintly. "No," Thea agreed. "I can only know one part of it for certain." "Which part?" said Roan. Thea lifted her hand off him. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her forearm over so that the whole room could see the ridged pale scars from wrist to elbow, and the faint gleam in the seams of them. "That it is the same metal that is in me," she said, "because it just came to greet it." Chapter 4. She was given the room next to his, 4 candles, and no authority whatsoever. That was the arrangement, and Thea understood it perfectly. Master Corvin remained the physician of Cairnholt. Master Corvin had letters from 3 holds and the fee that would have bought Thornmere twice over, and Thea had a burned face and a mule bag full of dried comfrey. What she had, instead of authority, was a dying man who had decided to be interested in her. It turned out to be enough. "Tell me your terms," Roan said on the first evening. "You said 4 things in the hall. I have been thinking about them all afternoon, which tells you how much else I have to think about. Cold water, salt, dark, and no fire in this room, ever." "Explain them. Not because I doubt you," he added, "because I am bored past all bearing, and if you explain them slowly, it will take up an hour." So she explained them slowly. Cold, because cold makes the witch silver sluggish and heavy, and a heavy thing sinks instead of climbing. Salt, because salt water out of a deep spring draws it, and she did not know why, only that it was the one thing her mother had done right on the night of the fire. Dark, because light is warmth, and warmth is invitation. No fire, because every brazier they had lit for his comfort had been a lantern held up to something that was already looking for the way in. "And no more iron in the wound," she said. "No lancets, no probes, no needles. Nothing they have been putting in there to draw it off." "Why?" "I will tell you tomorrow," Thea said. "I want to be sure first." They started that night. Byrne carried up water himself in a wooden pail from the cold spring that came out of the rock under the hold's north wall, and Thea salted it and soaked linen in it and laid the linen over the wound and changed it every hour until dawn. There was nothing skilled about it. It was the least clever medicine in the world. It was sitting up all night in the dark, wringing out cloths, and Thea had done it 100 times in Thornmere for fevers she could not cure. And she did it now for the king of the Highmoor, in a black, cold room, while he drifted in and out, and the whole hold slept badly beneath them. At some point in the small hours he said, out of nowhere, "You did not ask for gold." "No." "Everyone asks for gold. The 7th one asked for a horse as well." "I would like a horse," Thea admitted, "but I would rather have the fires out." He laughed. It was a wreck of a laugh, thin and short, and it turned into a cough that folded him up, and when it was over, she had her hand on his shoulder, and she could feel every bone in it. "Say something true to me," Roan said, when he could speak. "You are the only one here who does. Everyone else has started using the voice." Thea wrung out the cloth. "You are not going to be better in the morning," she said. "You will not feel any change for 3 days at least. If you are hoping to wake tomorrow with your strength back, you will be disappointed, and I do not want you spending one of your 9 days on being disappointed." "That," said Roan, "is the first useful thing anyone has said to me since the border." By the gray beginning of morning, the linen had gone from white to faintly, unmistakably tarnished, and Thea sat looking at it in her lap with her heart going hard. It was coming out. Slowly, in a quantity that would not have filled a thimble in a week, but it was coming out. She left him sleeping and went along the passage to find Anwen, and on her way she passed the side table by the door where the last healer's instrument still lay in an open roll, forgotten by everyone in the general business of giving up. Silver lancets, a long silver probe, a shallow silver bowl. Thea stopped. Then she went back and picked up the probe and carried it into the dark room and held it, very carefully, 6 inches above the wound. The probe pulled in her hand. Not much. A slight, steady, unmistakable lean, the way a boat leans on a rope. Every healer who had come to Cairnholt had gone into that wound with a piece of silver in their hand, and every single time, without knowing it, They had stood over the king and called the thing inside him upward. "Oh," said Thea in the dark. "Oh, you clever, clever man." Chapter 5. 3 days went by, and the king did not die. That does not sound like much. In Cairnholt, it went through the hold like weather. On the second day, the kitchen sent up broth without being asked. On the third day, a woman Thea had never spoken to stopped her in the passage and pressed a jar of honey into her hands and walked off before Thea could thank her. The page attached himself to her somewhere in there. His name was Tam. He was 11 years old, and he had appointed himself keeper of the water pails without consulting anybody. "They say you are not afraid of it," Tam said, hauling. "I am extremely afraid of it," Thea said. "Being afraid of a thing and touching it anyway are not opposites, Tam. They usually happen at the same time." Tam thought about that for 2 flights of stairs. "Is that why you are not afraid of him either?" "Who, the king?" "Everyone is a bit afraid of the king," Tam said. "He is very large. Was very large." "He is still very large," Thea thought, and did not say. The dark room became a country of its own. She spent her nights in it and slept in the mornings, and in the long black hours between water changes, the king of the Highmoor talked to her, because there was nothing else left for him to do. He told her about the border. He had ridden down to Marchford in the summer to settle a dispute over a toll, and the lord there, a man named Wick, had been ill for a year and had gone strange with it, jealous and suspicious, convinced the Highmoor meant to swallow his lands. Wick had demanded the old way of settling it, a challenge, an old bad custom nobody in the north had used in 50 years. "And I let him have it," Roan said, "because he was dying and he wanted his dignity, and I thought I would let him swing at me twice and then call it a draw and go home." "He cut you." "Barely. I did not even change my shirt." He was quiet a moment. "Wick died 9 days later. And I want you to know something, because you will not ask. I do not think he knew. He was not a wicked man. He was a frightened man who had been told for a year that he was being poisoned by his neighbors." "Told by whom?" said Thea. "By his physician," said Roan. Neither of them said anything for a while. The cloth went into the bucket and came out and was wrung. "My turn," Roan said. "The fire." "You do not want that story." "I want it very much," he said. "It is the only story in this hold I have not already heard twice." So Thea told him, in the dark, where it was easier. Her father had been the smith at Thornmere, and a good one. In the spring of the year she turned 14, a customer came to him with a strange commission and a great deal of money. He brought his own ore in a locked box and would not say where it came from, and he wanted it worked in secret at night with the shutters closed. "My father knew it was wrong metal," Thea said. "He told me so. He said it did not want to be a blade. It wanted to be somewhere else, and it kept reaching for the hammer. But he took the work." "We had a bad winter behind us, and the roof had gone," Thea said. "Yes, he took the work." She had been asleep in the loft above the forge when the fire started, on the last night, after the last of it was delivered. She remembered the sound more than the heat. She remembered her mother going back in for her father, and the beam, and getting herself as far as the mill race, with her arms full of something that shone. She had lain in that cold water until the sun came up, because it was the only place the burning stopped. "How many died?" Roan asked very quietly. 9, said Thea. "The forge and the 2 cottages either side, and the granary went, so the village lost the winter as well. They said afterward that my father had been careless with his coals." "Do you believe that?" "I did not think about it for 12 years, Thea said, and she heard the flatness in her own voice and did not try to fix it. It is a strange thing about the worst night of your life. You do not investigate it. You just survive it, and then you keep surviving it. And one day you are 26, and you have never once let yourself add the two ends of it together. And now, said Thea, a man rode into my market and told me his king was full of witch silver. She got up before he could answer that, and took the bucket and went down through the sleeping hold to the spring for fresh water, and found Anwen sitting on the bottom step in the cold with a candle waiting for her, gray in the face. You asked me a question the first night, Anwen said, about the other holds. I have been 3 days finding the answer because I did not want to find it. Tell me. 4 alphas, Anwen said. 3 years. Marchford, Greywater, Dunlock, and ours. Every one of them attended by the same celebrated man from the Iron Coast. 3 are dead, and Dunlock is a shadow who signs whatever is put in front of him. The old woman looked up, and her eyes were wet and furious. And girl, every one of those holds sits on a pass. Every single one. And every one of them has a new trade charter with the Iron Coast that was not there 4 years ago. 9 days, Anwen had said on the first evening. 4 of them were gone. Chapter 6. They found the blade in the armory, in a box, under a ledger, because nobody had known what else to do with it. It had come home with Roan from Marchford, as evidence in a dispute that had ended in a funeral, and Halloway the steward, who was a careful man, had written it in the inventory and put it away. It was a short dueling blade with a plain grip, and it had a dark bloom along the edge like breath on a window. Thea would not touch it with her hands. She held it in a fold of wet salted linen, turned it toward the lamp, and looked at the tang where it went down into the grip. There was a maker's mark stamped there. A small stamp, worn but clean. A hammer, and under the hammer, 3 lines like the ripples of running water. The armory went a very long way away for a moment. Thea heard Anwen say her name twice. Girl, Thea, sit down before you fall down. That is my father's mark, Thea said. You are certain? He cut that stamp himself when he was 19. The hammer for the trade and the water for the mere. She was shaking, and she was distantly annoyed about it. There are perhaps 40 things left in the world with that mark on them, and I own 3 of them, and one of them is in my boot. She pulled the little knife out of her boot and set it beside the blade on the table, and the 2 marks lay there side by side under the lamp, the same worn hammer, the same 3 lines of water, and Anwen let out a breath like a woman set down after carrying something a long way. Then the commission that burned your village, Anwen said slowly, is the blade that cut my king. He had it made in Thornmere, Thea said. He brought his own ore, and he paid in gold, and when it was finished, he burned the forge with the smith and his wife inside it, so that nobody living could say who had ordered it. She put both hands flat on the table because she needed to hold on to something. He did not know a girl was asleep in the loft. Or he did know, and he counted her among the 9. 12 years, said Anwen. That blade sat somewhere for 12 years. It was not made for Roan, Thea said. It was made for whoever he needed. It has been waiting in a drawer for the right dying man to hand it to. Anwen sat down heavily on the arms chest. Child, she said, who in this hold do you think will believe that? Master Corvin has letters from 3 holds. Master Corvin sat up with Greywater's Alpha for 11 nights, and everyone saw him do it, and everyone saw him weep at the burial. And you have a burned face, and a village nobody has heard of, and a stamp on a knife. I know, said Thea. Then what do you mean to do? Thea looked at the mark her father had cut when he was 19 years old and proud of himself. I am the only living thing in the world that saw the man who ordered that blade, she said. I was 14 and it was dark, and I saw him for about 6 seconds, and I could not pick his face out of a market. But I do not need his face." She wrapped the blade up in the wet linen. "He wears gloves, Anwen, in a warm room, at a bedside, at every meal. That man has never once put his bare hands near what he is doing." "Gloves are not evidence." "No," Thea agreed, "but they are a question, and I have 4 days to make somebody ask it." Chapter 7. She told him at first light, with the shutters still closed and the blade lying wrapped on the end of the bed, and she did not soften any part of it. Roan listened the way he did everything, without moving, and when she finished he was quiet for so long that she thought the fever had taken him under again. Then he said, "Go home, Tia." "No." "Byrne will take you tonight, not to Thornmere. That is the first place he would look. There is a farm out past Greywater that belongs to my mother's people, and you will be safe there, and I will send money." "No," Thea said again. "That man has killed 9 people in your village and 3 alphas in 3 years, and he has done it so cleanly that a whole province is going to bury me and thank him for his trouble." Roan's voice did not rise. It never rose. It just went down and down until it was almost nothing. "And you have just told me that you are the only witness left alive. Do you understand what you are to him now? You are the last loose end of the best piece of work he has ever done." "I understand it perfectly," said Thea. "Then go." "No." She stood up. "You do not get to do this. I am the king." "You are a man in a bed who cannot lift a cup," Thea said, "and you are trying to save my life by sending me away. And it is very kind, and I am telling you that it will not work, because there is nowhere in the world that is safe from a man who is patient enough to wait 12 years. She was breathing hard. She made herself stop and start again more quietly. "Roan, I have already been in the fire once. I got out of it by luck, in the dark, with nobody helping me. And I have spent 12 years being a woman that other people are careful around. If I get on a horse tonight, I will spend the rest of my life in a farmhouse past Greywater being careful. I would rather spend 4 days being useful." He looked at her for a long moment. "Sit down," he said. "You are swaying." She sat down on the edge of the bed. He got his hand out from under the blanket, which took him longer than it should have, and turned it palm up on the coverlet and waited. Thea put her hand in it. He did not look at her burned fingers. That was not the thing. Everyone eventually managed not to look. What Roan did was rub his thumb slowly along the ridge of the worst of the old scarring on the back of her hand, the thick one that ran from her knuckle to her wrist, the one that even she did not like to touch. And he did it absently, the way you touch anything that belongs to someone you are thinking about. "When this is finished," he said, "I am going to be very tiresome about you." "You will be dead," said Thea. "Or you will be busy." "I will be tiresome," said the king of the Highmoor, "about you," and closed his eyes and slept holding her hand. And Thea sat there in the dark for 1 hour by the water clock and did not move, and told herself several sensible things, none of which helped in the slightest. Chapter 8. The plan was Anwen's, and it was not a good plan, and it was the only one they had. They could not accuse him. Thea had a knife with a stamp on it and a story about gloves. What they could do was watch him and prove to themselves what he did at night, and put the proof in front of the one man in Cairnholt whose word the hold would take without question. So Byrne sat in the dark of the passage outside the king's chamber for 2 nights running, in his socks, with his back to the wall, feeling ridiculous. On the second night, an hour before dawn, Master Corvin came up the stairs. Thea was inside the room, sitting by the bed with her hand on the king's wrist and her heart going like a bird in a box, and she heard the latch, and she made herself go loose and let her head drop, the way a woman sleeps when she has been awake for 4 days. She heard him cross the floor. She heard him stop at the bedside and stand there, and she felt the change in the room, the way you feel a draft. The witch silver under Roan's skin went up. It happened fast, like water pulled up a wick. Under her fingers on his wrist, his pulse staggered. She heard his breath catch and thin, and it took everything she had ever learned about staying still to stay still, because what she wanted was to come off that stool with her nails out. The physician stood at that bedside for the length of 100 slow breaths. Thea counted them. He never touched him. He never opened a bag or unstoppered a bottle. He simply stood over a dying man in the dark, with his hands behind his back, doing nothing at all. And every one of those 100 breaths, the thing inside the king climbed toward his heart. Then he left. Thea did not move for a long moment after the latch dropped. Then she got the shutter open, and she got the lamp lit, and she folded the blanket back, and what she saw took the strength out of her legs. In 4 days of cold and salt and dark, she had walked the brightness back 2 finger widths. He had put it back in 100 breaths, and more. Byrne came in behind her and stood looking down at it, and Thea watched a soldier of 31 years' service turn the color of paper. "He never touched him," Byrne said. "He did not need to touch him," said Thea. "Byrne, what is he wearing at his throat?" "A cord. A black cord, and something on it under his shirt. I have never once seen it, and I have watched him for 4 days." She wrapped her hands in her apron because they had started to shake and she was tired of them doing that. "It goes toward more of itself. That is the one thing about this metal that has never changed. It goes toward whatever piece of it is loudest. Every healer who came here waved silver at it and dragged it upward by accident." She looked up. "He is doing it on purpose. He is carrying a collar." "Then we take it off him," Byrne said, already turning. "With what?" said Anwen from the doorway. "Captain, think. You lay a hand on the physician of the Iron Coast in front of this hold, on the word of a hedge healer and an old woman, and by noon you are a grief-maddened man who assaulted the only person still trying, and Halloway will have you disarmed for your own good, and I will not blame him." Byrne stood in the middle of the floor with his fists closed. "Then what?" he said. "Then we make him do it where everyone can see him," said Thea. She did not get the chance to explain what she meant, because the horn sounded in the yard for the hold to gather, and when they came down into the great hall, Master Corvin was already standing on the second step of the dais, gray gloves folded neatly in front of him, addressing 400 frightened people in a voice like warm milk. He was very sorry. He had sat up with their king through the night. There had been a change, and they should all know it, because they deserved honesty rather than comfort. The wasting had reached the great vessels. He gave him until tomorrow, at the most generous reckoning. There was one thing left. It was old, and it was hard to watch, and he would not do it without the hold's consent. Fire and the knife, taken as far as the body could bear, with the strength of a wolf behind it. He had seen it save one man in Dunlock. He would not promise. He would only say that he could not stand in this hall and let their king die of his own caution. The hall made a sound like a wave going out, and Thea, standing at the back with a bucket in her hands, understood exactly what she was looking at. He had run out of nights. 4 days of cold water had cost him his margin, and now he needed to finish it in daylight with the whole hold's blessing, and be seen to weep at another burial, and ride south with another charter. Halloway the steward said in the terrible silence, "Does anyone speak against?" And for the second time in her life, Thea walked up the middle of that hall. Chapter 9. "I speak against," said Thea. 400 faces turned. She had a bucket in her hands and salt on her sleeves, and she had not slept in 2 days, and she walked all the way to the dais and set the bucket down on the step, and she made herself speak slowly, because a shaking voice would lose it in the first sentence. "Your king has witch silver in him," she said. "Not a sickness. Metal, out of the deep seams of these fells, and it climbs toward heat, and every fire and every knife that has been laid on him has driven it in deeper. I have spent 4 days drawing it back with cold spring water and salt, and it was working, and last night it came back up faster than a body can do on its own." She turned so that the hall could see her, all of her, the burned side and the whole side. "I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to let me show you, here, in front of every one of you. And if I am wrong, you will know inside the hour, and then this man may have his fire." "Enough," said Master Corvin gently. "Enough now. Captain, this poor woman is not well." "I am extremely well," said Thea. "Master Corvin, will you take off your gloves?" The hall went quiet in a new way. "I beg your pardon," said Corvin. "Take off your gloves and come and stand beside me," Thea said. "And put your bare hands on your patient the way I have put mine on him every night for 4 nights. And I will lie down in the yard and let you burn him, and I will not say another word." He smiled at her. He had a good smile. It was the smile of a man who had done this in 3 other halls and knew exactly how long to let a silence run before he broke it kindly. But Roan of the Highmoor had been carried down into that hall on a litter because he had refused to be talked about in a room he was not in, and now he said, from the litter, in a voice like gravel at the bottom of a well, "Do as she says." "Your Grace," said Corvin. "Take them off," said Roan. Corvin did not take them off. They carried him down to the spring house under the north wall, where the cold water comes out of the rock into a long stone basin that the hold has used for 400 years. And the whole of Cairnholt came down the stairs behind them and packed the gallery and the steps and the doorway, silent, breathing. Thea salted the basin until her arms ached. They lowered the king into it on the sling of his own blanket, on his left side, up to the ribs, and he made a sound between a laugh and a curse at the cold, which was the best sound she had heard from him in 5 days. "This will not be quick," she said, loud enough for the gallery, "and do not any of you dare light a torch. Bring lamps if you must, and keep them at the top of the stairs." Then she knelt on the wet stone, and she put both bare hands over the wound in his side, and she waited. There is no drama in the truth of it. She knelt there for the best part of an hour, with her hands under cold water and her face a foot from his, and nothing happened at all, and she felt 400 people begin to shift and doubt above her. Roan looked up at her the entire time and did not once look away. "Talk to me," he said through his teeth. "About what?" "Anything. Tell me what you will do with the horse." "Ride it," said Thea. "Badly." And then it came. It came the way she remembered it, the way it had come out of the fire and into a 14-year-old girl in a mill race. Cold first, then a dragging heaviness, then a slow, crawling pull under the skin of her palms as the fine, bright threads left the king's flesh and crossed into hers. Because a warm hand touching is a shorter road than a collar across a room, and because the cold water had made them heavy and slow and stupid, and because there was 12 years of their own kind waiting in her arms and calling louder than anything else in the world. Somebody in the gallery screamed. Under the water, the brightness ran out of Roan's side like a tide going out, up over her wrists, into the ridged old scars on her forearms, and she felt every inch of it arrive, and she did not let go. The wound in his side, open for 26 days, closed as she watched. It simply closed, the edges going pink and ordinary and knitting like any honest cut on any healthy wolf, because there had never been anything wrong with him at all except the metal. And Master Corvin, standing on the 3rd stair with the whole hold behind him, made the only mistake he made in 12 years. He pulled the collar out of his shirt. Later, Thea would understand it. He had 400 witnesses watching a country healer undo 3 years of the most careful work of his life. And he had a matter of seconds, and he did the thing his hands knew how to do. He lifted the black cord over his head and held out a dull gray disc the size of a hen's egg, and he called it back. And it answered him. It came out of the basin. It came up out of that cold, salted water in a long, bright thread, sliding over the lip of the stone, running up the wet flags toward the third stair. And it was not blood, and it was not water, and there was not one soul in that spring house who could pretend they had not seen it. It reached the toe of his boot and climbed. It went up the good dark wool of his leg toward his hand, like a thing coming home. And Master Corvin of the Iron Coast stood there, holding it up in front of the entire hold of Cairnholt, with his mouth open. Onwin said into the silence, in the flat voice of a very old and very tired woman, "It knows its master." Then the noise started. Byrne had him before he reached the stairs. Thea did not see much of it, because by then the room had begun to swing, and because her arms had gone the color of a winter sky from wrist to elbow, and because the thing in her had finished arriving and had started, with great patience, to climb. Chapter 10. "Get me in the water," she said. "All of me, now." She heard her own voice come out steady and was obscurely proud of it. She heard Anwin shouting for salt, all of it, the whole store, and Tam's feet going up the stairs 3 at a time, and then the cold closed over her shoulders and drove the breath out of her. The king of the Highmoor came into the basin after her. He should not have been able to stand. He stood. He got in on his knees, in water up to his chest, with his side pink and closed, and his hands under her arms, and he held her upright in that freezing water while she talked him through it, word by word, teeth chattering. "Salt," she said. "Keep salting. It has to be heavy or it will not sink." "It is done. Both my arms under, not my hands, my arms, up past the elbow." Her jaw would barely work. "It is going for the heart, Roan. It does not know anything else. Keep me cold and keep me still, and it will lose interest and fall." "How long?" "Hours," said Thea. "It took my mother all night." So it took all night. They stayed in that spring house until the lamps at the top of the stairs burned down and were replaced twice. Anwin salted the water until the basin ran white. Byrne stood at the door and turned people away. Tam sat on the step and cried and hauled water anyway, which Thea told him afterward was the bravest thing anyone did that night, and meant it. And the whole time, the king of the Highmoor knelt in cold water with his arms around a scarred woman from Thornmere, and would not let go. And somewhere past the middle of the night, when she had stopped being able to feel her hands and had gone quiet, he put his mouth against her wet hair and said things to her that nobody else in that spring house ever repeated. At the gray beginning of morning, the brightness let go. It came out of her forearms the way water goes out of wrung cloth, in threads, sinking, and it lay along the bottom of the stone basin in a dull gray smear that did not shine at all. Drowned. Anwin said it looked like nothing on earth. Byrne said it looked like a slug. Thea, who was past all sense by then, laughed until her ribs ached, and then went under and had to be hauled out. They wrapped her in every blanket in the hold and put her in the room next to the king's, and she slept for a day and a half. When she woke, there was a bowl of broth on the table and a fire in the grate, and Roan of the Highmoor was asleep in a chair beside her bed with his chin on his chest, 4 days into eating properly, already looking less like a carving and more like a man. Thea looked at the fire and at him and thought, with the first clear happiness she had felt in 12 years, that she was going to have to learn to stop being afraid of it. Chapter 11. 6 weeks later, on a bright, cold morning at the end of autumn, the king of the Highmoor rode into Thornmere with 50 riders behind him and stopped at the bottom of the bad road, where the burned forge was. Nobody had rebuilt it. 12 years of nettles had come up through the floor, and a birch had got itself established in the corner where the bellows used to be, and the anvil was still there, under the ivy, because an anvil is too heavy to steal and too honest to rot. The whole village came out. Of course they did. 50 riders. Roan got down off his horse and walked into that ruin in front of every soul in Thornmere. And he took his gloves off, and he knelt on the burned floor and put his bare hand flat on the anvil. 12 years ago, he said, a man from the Iron Coast paid the smith of this village to work a metal no honest smith would touch. And then he burned this forge with the smith and his wife inside it. And he took 9 of your people, and he let you believe for 12 years that a careful man had been careless with his coals. His voice carried. It carried the length of that road. He did it to make a blade. That blade was used on me, and I would have died of it in a warm room with a physician holding my hand, and this village would never have known why, if the smith's daughter had not walked out of your market and told my captain to put the fires out. Thea stood at the edge of it with her hood down and her hands loose at her sides, and she did not hide the burned half of her face, and she watched 60 people who had spent 12 years looking past her shoulder look straight at her instead. His name was Corin of Thornmere, said the king, still kneeling. He was a good smith and a good man, and he was murdered. His mark goes back on this forge. It goes on every tool made for my hold from this year forward, and there will be a forge here again before the spring, and the crown pays for it, and I will hear no argument from anyone about that, least of all from her. Then he stood up and turned around and said into the enormous silence, also, I would like to marry her, and she has refused me twice. Old Marta from the alehouse dropped a bucket. They walked up to the mill race afterward, the 2 of them, alone, because Thea could not stay in the middle of that. Twice, she said. It is the custom, and you know it is the custom, said Roan. And Alpha asks 3 times before witnesses. You may refuse twice for any reason at all, and nobody may ever ask you why. And if you refuse the 3rd time, it is finished forever, and I go home. He put his hands in his pockets. You have used up your 2 cheap ones. I am saving the last until you tell me what is actually the matter. Because it is not my rank. You have never once been impressed by my rank. Thea watched the water go over the stones. The mill race had not changed at all. That was the strange part. The forge had burned and her family had died, and she had grown up and gone gray in her heart, and the water still went over the same stones, making the same noise. You would be dead, she said. That is what is the matter. You would be dead, and you know it, and every person in that hold knows it. And I cannot tell, Roan. I cannot tell what is you and what is a man who woke up alive. He thought about it. That was one of the things she had come to love, that he never rushed at her with reassurance. I will give you the true answer, he said, and it is not a flattering one. On the first night, when you put out my braziers, I did not think, there is the woman I will marry. I thought, there is somebody who is not going to lie to me, and I would like her to stay in the room. He looked at her. It became the other thing somewhere around the 3rd night, when you told me I would not feel any better in the morning. I have been surrounded my whole life by people who tell me what will help. You are the first person who ever told me what was true, and then stayed to sit through it with me. That is gratitude, said Thea. Then let me put it another way, said the king of the Highmoor. I have been well for 6 weeks. I have run the fells twice. Nothing has been drawn out of me since. If it were gratitude, it would have worn off by now. And instead, I have spent 6 weeks arranging reasons to be in whatever room you are in, and my war captain has begun making a face about it." Thea laughed. It surprised her, coming out of her like that, by the water. "Ask me the third time," she said. "I will not," said Roan. "Not today, and not this week. You will be sure, or you will be free, and there is no third thing." He took her hand, the burned one, the one she did not like, and turned it over and kissed the inside of the wrist where the worst of it was, without ceremony, the way a man kisses the hand he intends to be holding for the next 40 years. "Take as long as you need. I have nothing but time now. You gave it to me." She was sure 11 days later, on the first night of true winter, when the snow came down over the fells and the hold was quiet, and she went along the passage to his door instead of her own. He had let the fire go out. He had let it go out every night for 6 weeks, without ever once being asked, because of a thing she had said on a night when she thought he was dying. "You do not have to do that anymore," Thea said from the doorway. "I know," said Roan. She crossed the dark room, and he stood up to meet her, and she put her scarred hands on either side of his face, and there was no flinch in him anywhere. There never had been, not once, not on the first night when she was a stranger with a burned face and a bucket. He was warm all the way through. That was the thing she had not expected and never got used to. All that winter, he was the warmest thing in the Highmoor, and she had spent 12 years thinking she was done with heat forever. They were married at the turn of the year, in the great hall, in front of everyone. Chapter 12. The winter after that was the quietest winter Cairnholt had known in years, and Thea spent most of it learning how to be looked at. It went slowly. It went in small pieces. The kitchen women stopped stepping back and started arguing with her about broth. Tam trailed her everywhere with a slate, asking questions faster than she could answer them. And by midwinter, Onwin had taken him as her apprentice, on the condition that he stop running on the stairs, which he did not do. Byrne, who had never in 31 years apologized to anyone, apologized to her one evening for taking 2 whole minutes to decide to bring her north. And Thea told him it had been closer to 10 seconds, and he told her to let a man have his conscience. And one afternoon, in the 2nd month of the year, Thea walked into the great hall with her sleeves pushed up to the elbow because she had been washing linen, and got halfway across the floor before she understood what was different. Nobody had looked away. She stopped in the middle of Cairnholt's great hall with her scarred arms bare and 40 people going about their business around her, and Halloway the steward said, "Your Grace, the salt order," and handed her a list. And it was the ordinary sort of moment that a life is actually made out of, and Thea had to go and stand in the doorway to the yard for a minute in the cold. She kept the scars. It should be said plainly, because people always ask. The witch silver was gone out of them, drowned in the spring house basin that night, and the marks it left behind stayed exactly where they were, on her jaw and her throat and her shoulder and both arms. And they did not fade, and she did not cover them. The pack called her the Queen of the Highmoor in documents. In the yard and the kitchens and the villages, where it counts, they called her the Queen who was not afraid of it. And that name outlived every one of them. Here is what became of all of it, since a story owes you the whole ending and not half of one. Corvin of the Iron Coast was tried in the great hall of Cairnholt in the spring, before the 4 holds together, with Thea and Anwin and Byrne, and 400 witnesses to what happened in the spring house. He admitted nothing. He did not have to. A clerk of the merchant company of the Iron Coast, brought north in irons, admitted all of it in one afternoon, and the ledgers he carried did the rest. 4 alphas, 4 passes, 4 charters. It was never a grand plot. It was a business arrangement, which is somehow worse. Corvin was stripped of his rolls, forbidden ever again to touch a sick person, and sentenced to the salt cells above the pass for the rest of his life. He died there in the 4th winter. Thea did not go, and never once wished she had. The merchant company's charter was broken in every hold in the north, and the 4 passes of the Ashfells were put under the joint keeping of the 4 holds, which was the one good thing that came out of any of it. Lord Dunlock, the one Corvin had left alive as proof of his own skill, was still alive because he had been treated the least. Thea went to him in the spring with 2 barrels of salt and a great deal of patience, and it took 9 weeks, and he walked out of his own spring house on his own legs. He signs his own name now, and every year at the turn of the year, he sends Cairnholt a cask of something disgraceful, and Rowan drinks it out of loyalty. The record of Marchford was corrected. It says now, in the ledger and on the stone, that Lord Wick was poisoned by his physician, told for a year that his neighbors were killing him, and handed a blade. His daughter holds Marchford. She and Thea write to each other. The blade could not be burned because burning was the one thing it wanted, so they drowned it. It lies in the deep of the Springhouse Basin with the collar and with the drowned gray smear of everything that came out of a king and a healer on one long cold night, under a sealed stone and a bronze door, and the key to that door hangs in the Queen's own room. There has never been a fire lit in that room since. Every other hearth in Cairnholt burns from the first frost to the last, and Thea is the one who lights the great halls every year, herself, in front of everybody, which the hold considers a fine joke, and she considers something else. Thornmere got its forge back before the first cutting of hay, and the road mended 2 years later. So it is now a village with a good forge and a good road, which is more than most places manage. Her father's mark is on it, the hammer and the 3 lines of water, and it goes on every tool made for the crown. Anwen retired to the cottage by the springhouse, and never fully retired, the way healers never do, and lived long enough to be extremely rude to 3 generations of apprentices. Tam was the first of them. He is the hold's healer now, and he still runs on the stairs. Byrne walked Thea to the dais at her wedding because there was nobody else to do it, and cried harder than anyone in the hall, and denied it for 11 years. Rowan and Thea had 2 children, a daughter Nell, for the mother who carried a burning girl to cold water and did not come back out again, a son Corin, for a smith who knew the metal was wrong and took the work anyway because the roof had gone. Both of them grew up in a hold where nobody flinched at anything, and neither of them ever thought their mother's face was remarkable in the slightest, which was, in the end, the whole victory. And on winter nights, when the fells were white and the hall was warm, the king of the Highmoor would look down the length of his own table at a woman with burn scars on her jaw and her throat and both her arms, arguing with the steward about a salt order, and think what he had thought on the first night in a dark room with the braziers out. There is somebody who will not lie to me. I would like her to stay. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Now I have a question for you, and you can only pick one. When did you know he loved her? The night she put out his fires? Or the morning he knelt in the burned forge and said her father's name out loud? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If you would like more stories, there are plenty more on the channel. Much love, Sophie.